I'll be honest. I almost called the police the first night I met my neighbor. Not because he threatened me. Not because he touched me. Because somehow, after a 3-minute conversation in the hallway, he already knew I lived alone. And the way he said it made my skin crawl. At the time, I told myself I was overreacting. That's the dangerous thing about men like Ryan. Nothing they do sounds wrong when you try to explain it out loud. The discomfort only exists in the moment, buried inside tone, timing, and the strange feeling that somebody sees too much too quickly. I moved into the apartment building in Austin in early September, about 6 months after my divorce was finalized. I was 34, working remotely for a healthcare software company, and trying very hard to rebuild a version of my life that felt quiet again. That was honestly my only goal. Quiet. No drama. No fighting. No checking somebody's location at 2 in the morning. No wondering why a person who supposedly loved me could lie directly to my face without blinking. After my marriage ended, I became obsessed with stability. I liked routines. I liked predictable mornings and locked doors and grocery shopping at the same store every Sunday. My life wasn't exciting anymore, but for the first time in years, it finally felt safe. Ryan moved in across the hall about 3 weeks after me. At first, he barely registered in my life. He was polite in the forgettable kind of way. Clean sneakers, neutral clothes, soft-spoken voice. The kind of guy you would trust immediately because there was nothing memorable enough not to. We had the kind of neighbor relationship most adults have in apartment buildings. Morning. Hey, how's work? Busy. That was it. The first real conversation happened on a Thursday evening after work. I had just stepped out of the elevator carrying groceries when I saw him kneeling outside his apartment, struggling with the zipper on a black suitcase. He looked up and smiled awkwardly. "I swear this thing breaks every time I travel," he said. I laughed a little. "That's why I only use backpacks now." Smart. He stood up and pulled the handle into place. "You travel much?" "Not lately." He nodded like he already expected that answer. Then his eyes moved briefly toward the grocery bags in my hand. "Trader Joe's," he said. "You're either divorced or live alone." The comment caught me off guard enough that I actually laughed. "What?" "I'm serious," he said with a grin. "Every single divorced person in this building shops there." I smiled politely, but something about it immediately felt strange. Not the joke itself. The confidence. Like he'd already categorized me after 2 hallway conversations. Before I could answer, he tilted his head slightly. "So which one is it?" "What?" "Divorced or living alone?" There it was again. That strange feeling. Not fear exactly. More like the sensation of somebody stepping 1 inch too far into your personal space without physically touching you. I shifted the grocery bags against my hip. That's a weird question. For the first time since I met him, he looked embarrassed. "Sorry," he said quickly. That sounded worse out loud. It definitely did. He laughed softly and raised both hands. Fair. I should have forgotten about the interaction after that. Honestly, most people probably would have. But later that night, while I was putting leftovers into the fridge, I caught myself thinking about the way he looked at me when he asked the question. Not curious. Certain. Like he already knew the answer and just wanted confirmation. I ignored the feeling and moved on with my night. Around 11, I was sitting on the couch answering work emails when someone knocked softly on my door. I checked the peephole first. Ryan. I opened the door halfway without unlatching the chain. "Hey," he said. "Sorry to bother you." "It's okay." He held up his phone. "I'm leaving for Denver tomorrow morning, and I wanted to ask a favor." Normal. Completely normal. I ordered a couple work packages before my trip got extended, and they'll probably arrive while I'm gone. "Would you mind grabbing them if they get delivered outside my apartment?" I hesitated for maybe half a second, but mostly because I was tired. "Sure," I said. "That's fine." "Seriously?" "It's not a big deal." He smiled then, genuinely relieved. "Thank you." Some of the equipment is expensive and management loses their minds if anything goes missing. Equipment. The word barely registered at the time. He thanked me again and started walking back toward his apartment before stopping suddenly. "Oh, one more thing." I looked up. "If packages come late at night, Bring them inside your apartment instead of leaving them in the hallway. The request itself wasn't strange. Austin package theft was common enough that half the building had cameras already. But the way he said it felt rehearsed. Specific. Like he'd already imagined exactly where those boxes would end up. I nodded slowly. Okay. Thanks again, Claire. I frowned immediately. Because I had never told him my name. The second he said my name, something inside me tightened. Not dramatically. Not enough for me to slam the door or panic or suddenly realize I was standing across from a dangerous person. It was smaller than that. Sharper. The kind of discomfort that slips under your skin quietly and stays there long after the moment passes. I kept my expression neutral. I don't remember telling you my name. Ryan looked surprised for maybe half a second before smiling again. The leasing office mentioned it when your mail got delivered to my box last week, he said casually. I probably should have led with that. It sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Everything about him always sounded reasonable. I nodded once, mostly because I didn't know what else to do, and he gave me another quick thank you before disappearing back into his apartment. A few seconds later, I locked my door and stood there longer than necessary with my hand still resting on the deadbolt. Part of me wanted to laugh at myself. Seriously, Claire? You're weirded out because your neighbor knows your name? But another part of me kept replaying the conversation in my head. Not the words. The pacing. The way he answered questions just a little too smoothly, like he'd already anticipated them. Eventually, I forced myself to move on with my night. I cleaned the kitchen, answered a few emails, watched half an episode of some forgettable reality show, and finally went to bed around midnight. The next morning, there was already a package outside Ryan's apartment. Small brown box. No branding. No sender label. Just a printed shipping sticker with his apartment number. I picked it up on my way back from getting coffee downstairs and brought it into my apartment like I promised. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second before opening the message. Thanks for grabbing it. No introduction. No, hey, just that. I frowned immediately. How did you get my number? The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. Emergency contact sheet in the leasing office. Hope that's okay. Again, technically reasonable. Still uncomfortable. Most people would have asked first. I typed back. Yeah. A few seconds later, another message came through. Did the box look damaged at all? I glanced toward the package sitting near my kitchen counter. No. Good. That word again. Good. I don't know why it bothered me so much, but it did. I set my phone down and tried to focus on work, but throughout the morning, I kept catching myself looking toward the box for no reason. It wasn't making noise. Nothing about it looked unusual. Still, the atmosphere in my apartment somehow felt different with it there, like I was temporarily holding something important without understanding why. Around 4 that afternoon, another package arrived. This one was larger and noticeably heavier. I dragged it inside, set it next to the first box, and immediately noticed something strange. No company information again. No fragile sticker. No barcode branding. Nothing. Just shipping labels. It looked less like a commercial delivery and more like something privately mailed between people. I took a picture of the label and zoomed in. No sender address. That finally made me pause. Because expensive work equipment shipped across state lines without sender information didn't make much sense, especially for someone supposedly traveling for business. Before I could think about it longer, my phone buzzed again. Second package came. I stared at the message. The timing felt almost impossible. I hadn't texted him yet. I looked toward my apartment door automatically, suddenly aware of how thin the walls were in the building. Then I typed, "Yeah, just brought it inside." His reply came immediately. "Perfect. Thanks, Claire." There was that strange feeling again. Like he already knew. I tried to shake it off, but my concentration was ruined for the rest of the evening. By 9 o'clock, I gave up pretending to work, microwaved leftover pasta, poured a glass of wine, and curled up on the couch with my laptop. Around 10:30, I got another text. "You always work this late?" I stared at the screen, then slowly typed back. "What?" 3 dots appeared. "Saw your laptop light under the door earlier." I read the message twice. Something about it made my chest tighten instantly. Not because neighbors noticing light under doors was strange. It wasn't. Because I suddenly realized he'd been standing outside my apartment long enough to notice what I was doing inside it. I tried to keep the conversation casual. Insomnia and deadlines. A minute passed before he answered. Bad combination. I didn't reply after that. Instead, I muted the conversation and locked my phone, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me long after. Around midnight, I finally got up to bring my wine glass into the kitchen when I noticed something that made me stop cold. The larger package near the counter wasn't fully sealed anymore. One corner of the tape had lifted slightly. At first, I assumed it happened while I dragged it inside. But when I walked closer, I realized something else. The tape hadn't torn. It had been cut. Cleanly. Precisely. Like somebody opened the box carefully and pressed it shut again afterward. I stood there staring at it while a slow wave of anxiety crawled up my spine. Because suddenly one question became impossible to ignore. If the package was already opened, then who opened it? I should have left the box alone. That's the part one think about now more than anything else. Not the cameras. Not the police. Not even Ryan. Just that moment in my kitchen, standing barefoot on cold tile at almost midnight, staring at a strip of sliced tape and feeling my instincts beg me to stop. Because deep down, I already knew opening that package was going to change something. I just didn't understand how much. For almost a full minute, I stood there arguing with myself. Maybe the shipping company inspected it. Maybe the tape split while moving it. Maybe you're exhausted and turning normal things into horror movies again. I actually laughed nervously at myself after that thought. Then I reached forward and touched the edge of the cardboard. The tape lifted immediately. Too easily. Like someone had already opened the box more than once. A strange feeling settled into my stomach as I slowly pulled one side apart just enough to peek inside. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Black plastic. Wires. Foam padding. Then my eyes adjusted. And I realized I was staring directly into a camera lens. I froze. Not metaphorically. Physically. My body literally stopped moving for a second while my brain tried to catch up. The device inside wasn't packaged like a normal product. It was already assembled and mounted onto some kind of metal bracket, positioned upright inside the box instead of wrapped separately in protective material. Ready to use. That was the first thought that hit me. Not new. Not packed. Ready. I leaned slightly closer before I could stop myself. That's when I saw the tiny green light blinking beside the lens. My heartbeat immediately spiked. No. There was no way. I crouched lower, staring harder now. The light blinked again. Slow. Steady. Intentional. The camera was on. A cold wave moved through my chest so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. I stepped backward and nearly knocked over my wine glass in the process. The sound startled me enough that I looked toward my apartment door automatically, suddenly aware of how alone I was. Or maybe not alone. That thought hit me so fast it made my stomach twist. I looked back at the box, at the lens, at the blinking green light. And for the first time since meeting Ryan, I felt actual fear instead of discomfort. Because active cameras needed power. And power meant connection. My phone buzzed violently against the counter, making me jump hard enough to curse out loud. Ryan. I stared at his name on the screen while my pulse hammered in my throat. Did the third package arrive? My eyes moved slowly back toward the open box. Third package. Not second. Third. I hadn't even realized another delivery had shown up tonight. A horrible realization crawled over me then. He knew exactly how many boxes were inside my apartment. I typed carefully, trying to sound normal even though my hands were shaking now. Yeah, I just saw it. The typing bubble appeared instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. Everything okay? My chest tightened. The question itself wasn't strange. The timing was. I looked at the camera again, and before I could think myself out of it, I grabbed a kitchen towel nearby and threw it over the open section of the box, covering the lens completely. 5 seconds passed. Maybe less. Then my phone rang. Not a text. A call. Ryan. My stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt. I stared at the screen vibrating in my hand while every possible explanation crashed through my head at once. Maybe coincidence. Maybe motion alerts. Maybe. No. I already knew. The phone kept ringing. Finally, I answered. Hello. Ryan's voice sounded calm. Too calm. Hey, he said softly. Can you uncover the box for me? Every muscle in my body locked instantly. I didn't speak. Couldn't. The silence stretched long enough that he exhaled quietly on the other end. The camera feed cut out, he continued. I need the lens visible while I finish calibrating it remotely. Feed. Lens. Remotely. The words landed one after another like cold metal dropping into water. I stared at the towel covering the box while my heartbeat pounded so loudly I could barely hear him anymore. You're watching it right now? I asked quietly. There was a brief pause before he answered. I'm testing the connection. Not denial. Not confusion. An explanation. Careful. Controlled. Prepared. I swallowed hard. Why would a work camera already be turned on inside a sealed package? Another pause. This one slightly longer. Then he laughed softly, almost like I was being unreasonable. They're prototypes, he said. They stay active during remote diagnostics. The answer came too quickly. Like he'd used it before. I looked around my apartment without meaning to then. My kitchen suddenly felt unfamiliar to me, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes for the first time. Ryan's voice softened slightly. Claire. I realized I still hadn't uncovered the box. Slowly, keeping my eyes on the blinking light underneath the towel, I pulled the fabric away. Almost immediately, Ryan exhaled again. Relieved. That scared me more than anything else so far, because relief meant he'd genuinely lost visual contact for those few seconds, which meant he hadn't been bluffing. He'd really been watching. You scared me for a second, he said lightly. My grip tightened around the phone. How? Silence. Then carefully. What do you mean? How did you know I covered it? This time the pause lasted too long. Long enough to feel dangerous. Finally, he answered, calmer than before. Claire, he said, you opened the package, didn't you? There it was. Not anger. Not surprise. Confirmation. And somehow that felt worse. Because in that moment, I realized something that made my entire body go cold. Ryan wasn't nervous that I discovered the camera. He was nervous that I discovered it too early. I didn't sleep at all after that call. I tried pretending everything was normal for maybe an hour. I turned on the TV, opened my laptop, even answered a few work emails I definitely could have ignored until morning. But none of it worked because every few minutes my eyes drifted back toward the boxes near the kitchen counter, toward the cameras. Knowing they were there changed the entire feeling of my apartment. The place that had felt calm and safe a week earlier suddenly felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain logically. I kept imagining invisible sight lines cutting through the rooms, following me every time I moved. Around 2 in the morning, I finally muted the television and sat in silence. That's when I noticed something else. A faint humming sound. At first, I thought it was my refrigerator, but when I stood up and walked closer to the counter, I realized the noise was coming from inside the unopened boxes themselves. Low electrical vibration. Barely audible, but definitely there. I stared at the packages for a long moment before crouching beside the second one carefully. Up close, I noticed tiny ventilation holes along the side of the cardboard. Small enough that I hadn't seen them earlier unless light hit the box directly. My stomach tightened immediately. Those cameras weren't simply powered on. They were actively running. I suddenly understood why Ryan wanted them inside my apartment instead of the hallway. Temperature control. Stable connection. Access. The realization made me feel physically sick. I stood up too quickly and grabbed my phone, opening our text conversation again. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately. Another part wanted to drag the boxes outside, lock my door, and pretend none of this had ever happened. Instead, I did something stupid. I searched his name online. At first, nothing looked unusual. LinkedIn profile. Old company bio. A few tagged marathon photos from years earlier. Exactly the kind of clean digital footprint you'd expect from a quiet corporate professional in his 30s. But then I noticed something strange. His current company didn't exist. I clicked the website listed on his LinkedIn page and got an error message. No employee directory. No business registration. Nothing. I searched the company name directly. Still nothing. No records. No reviews. No social media presence. It was like the business had disappeared completely. A cold feeling settled into my chest as I stared at the screen. Because suddenly the work prototype's story started falling apart too. Before I could think about it longer, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer anyway. Hello. For a second, all I heard was breathing. Then a woman spoke quietly. Did Ryan ask you to hold packages for him? Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. Who is this? My name's Nicole, she said quickly. I used to live in his building downtown. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table without taking my eyes off the boxes. How did you get my number? He still uses the same tricks, she said, almost like she hadn't heard me. Friendly conversation. Small favors. Then the cameras. The cameras. Hearing someone else say it out loud made everything suddenly feel more real. More dangerous. I lowered my voice automatically even though I was alone. What are you talking about? There was a shaky exhale on the other end of the line. I think he records women, she whispered. The room felt colder immediately. I looked toward my dark hallway without meaning to, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow inside my apartment. That's insane. I know, she said softly. That's exactly what I told myself too. Something about the exhaustion in her voice made me listen instead of hanging up. Nicole explained that she met Ryan almost a year earlier in another apartment complex across the city. According to her, everything started exactly the same way. Casual conversations. Friendly check-ins. Small moments designed to make him feel familiar. Then came the favors. Dog sitting. Mail pickups. Emergency spare keys. Slowly, carefully, he worked his way into routines. He always made it feel accidental, she said. Like you were the one choosing to trust him. I closed my eyes briefly because that was exactly what this felt like. Not force. Permission. Nicole continued speaking, her voice tightening slightly now. At first I thought the cameras were security devices. Then he started knowing things he shouldn't know. My grip tightened around the phone. What kind of things? A pause. Then quietly. He repeated a private conversation I had inside my apartment. A chill moved through me instantly. He laughed it off afterward, she continued. Said he overheard me through the walls. And honestly, I almost believed him. Of course she did. That was the terrifying part about men like Ryan. They never behaved strangely enough all at once. Every individual moment sounded explainable by itself. Only later did the pattern become visible. What happened after that? I asked carefully. Another pause stretched between us. Then she said something that made my chest tighten immediately. I found one of the cameras hidden inside my smoke detector. I looked slowly back toward the boxes near my counter. 3 cameras. Already assembled. Already powered. Already connected. How long was it there? I whispered. Almost 4 months. I felt sick. Nicole's voice cracked slightly when she spoke again. I confronted him after I found it. Worst mistake I could have made. What happened? He convinced me I was paranoid. The sadness in her voice hit harder than fear. Because I could already imagine it happening. Ryan staying calm, reasonable, patient, making her sound unstable while he stood there acting concerned. He moved out 2 days later, she continued. Different apartment, different target. Target. I hated that word instantly because deep down, I already knew she was right. Then Nicole asked the question I'd been trying not to ask myself all night. Claire, are you sure those are the first cameras? The question hit me harder than anything else she'd said that night. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure. Before I could answer, Nicole spoke again, quieter this time. Check your smoke detectors first. The call ended a few minutes later, but even after I locked my phone and set it face down on the table, I couldn't move. I just sat there staring into my dark apartment while my brain replayed every strange interaction I'd had with Ryan over the past few weeks. The comments about my schedule. The way he always seemed to know when I was home. The messages arriving seconds after deliveries. At the time, each moment felt small enough to dismiss. But stacked together like this, they formed something else entirely. Something deliberate. I finally stood up around 3 in the morning. Slowly. Quietly. Like someone might already be listening. The thought sounded irrational in my head, but that didn't stop my pulse from climbing as I walked into the hallway connecting my bedroom and bathroom. My eyes moved upward almost immediately toward the smoke detector mounted near the ceiling. White plastic. Normal shape. Nothing unusual. I stared at it anyway. Then I grabbed a chair from the kitchen. The entire apartment felt unnaturally silent while I carried it down the hallway. Every small sound suddenly seemed amplified. The scrape of chair legs against hardwood, my breathing, the faint hum still coming from the unopened boxes in the kitchen. I climbed carefully onto the chair and reached toward the detector. The second my fingers touched it, I knew. It wasn't secured properly. Instead of feeling mounted into the ceiling, it shifted slightly under my hand like it had already been removed before. A cold wave moved through my stomach. I twisted the detector slowly. 1 turn. 2. Then it came loose in my hand. For a second, everything looked normal. Battery compartment. Wiring plate. Dust along the edges. Then I noticed the tiny black circle hidden near one side of the casing. Lens. So small I almost missed it. My entire body went numb. I climbed down too quickly and nearly lost my balance hitting the floor. The detector slipped from my hand and landed against the carpet with a dull crack. I just stood there staring at it. Because suddenly Nicole's question had an answer. No, those were not the first cameras. A horrible realization spread through me piece by piece after that. Ryan hadn't been preparing to start watching me. He already had been. The new cameras weren't the beginning. They were upgrades. I looked around my apartment slowly then, and for the first time since moving in, the place no longer felt familiar. Every object suddenly carried suspicion with it. The air vent above the TV. The digital clock near my bed. The bookshelf facing the couch. I started seeing potential hiding places everywhere. My breathing became shallow as I walked back into the kitchen and stared at the unopened packages again. Now they looked different to me. Not mysterious anymore. Predatory. My phone buzzed suddenly against the counter, and I jumped so hard my elbow slammed into the edge of the sink. Ryan, you awake? I stared at the message while adrenaline flooded through my chest. There was no way that timing was coincidence. Had he seen me remove the detector? Did he already know? Another message appeared before I could respond. Lights are on. My stomach dropped instantly. I looked toward the hallway without thinking, then toward my bedroom, then back at the phone. He was watching. Maybe not through the detector anymore. Maybe through another camera I still hadn't found. But somehow he knew I was awake and moving around the apartment. My hands were shaking now. I forced myself to type carefully. Couldn't sleep. The typing bubble appeared immediately. Yeah, he replied. You seem anxious tonight. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Not, are you anxious? You seem anxious. Like he was observing me directly. I suddenly realized something terrifying then. Ryan wasn't checking whether I discovered the cameras. He was studying how I reacted after discovering them. Testing behavior. Monitoring fear. I looked toward the detector still lying on the hallway floor. Then back toward the kitchen. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave the apartment immediately. But another thought stopped me. If I ran now, he would know for certain. And somehow that felt dangerous. So instead, I picked the smoke detector up carefully, twisted it back into place, and forced myself to breathe normally. Then I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water with shaking hands, and sent Ryan another message. Just stressed about work. 3 dots appeared. Then, you should get some sleep. The message sounded caring. That was the worst part. Everything about Ryan always sounded caring. I stared at the screen for several long seconds before finally locking my phone. Then, very slowly, I looked around my apartment again. And for the first time all night, another feeling started pushing its way through the fear. Anger. Because suddenly I understood something clearly. Ryan didn't think of me as a person. To him, I was a routine, a schedule, a behavioral pattern, a private life he'd quietly turned into entertainment. And somewhere in the middle of all that fear, I realized something else too. He still thought I didn't know the full truth, which meant for the moment, I still had one advantage left. I barely moved the rest of the night. Not because I thought staying still would protect me. At that point, I already understood how deep this probably went. I stayed still because I suddenly became aware of every tiny habit I had inside that apartment. The way I paced while thinking. The fact I always checked the lock twice before bed. How I opened the fridge whenever I was anxious without actually eating anything. Ryan knew those things. Or at least parts of them. That realization sat in my chest like something heavy and poisonous while I lay awake staring at the ceiling until sunrise. Around 7 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. Ryan. Flight got changed. I'll be back earlier than expected. I read the message twice. Then once more. Earlier. My stomach tightened immediately because I knew exactly what that meant. He was coming back because something had changed. Maybe he sensed it during our conversation. Maybe he noticed my behavior shifting. Maybe he lost visual access for a few seconds when I removed the smoke detector. Whatever the reason was, he no longer felt comfortable staying away. I typed carefully. When are you getting back? A minute passed before he replied. Probably around noon. For hours. That was all I had. I forced myself out of bed, showered, dressed, and tried to think logically for the first time since this started. Panic wasn't helping anymore. Fear definitely wasn't helping. If Nicole was right, Ryan depended on confusion and self-doubt. He relied on women questioning their own instincts long enough for him to stay in control. I couldn't afford that anymore. So I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and started writing down everything I knew. The packages, the active cameras, the smoke detector, the messages, the timing. Seeing it written out made the situation feel even worse somehow because suddenly it stopped looking like paranoia and started looking like evidence. Halfway through my second cup of coffee, another thought hit me. If Ryan had done this before, there were probably other women besides Nicole. I opened LinkedIn again and searched deeper this time. Old apartment tags, mutual followers, archived photos. Eventually, I found a woman named Melissa who had commented on one of Ryan's marathon pictures 3 years earlier. Hope the new apartment is less creepy than the last one, lol. At first, the comment sounded harmless. Then I noticed Ryan never replied. I clicked her profile immediately. Private account. No recent activity. Still, my pulse picked up because for the first time I had proof Nicole wasn't the only one. Ryan had a pattern. A real one. My phone buzzed again before I could think further. You okay? The message made my skin crawl instantly now. Not because of the words themselves, but because I finally understood what they really meant. Not concern. Surveillance. Checking status. Monitoring reaction. I ignored the message completely this time. 5 minutes later, another one came through. Did you sleep at all? Then. You seemed tense last night. There it was again. Observed behavior. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally typing back. Just stressed. Read immediately. No response after that. And honestly, the silence bothered me more. Because now I knew he was thinking. Adjusting. Trying to figure out whether I was still manageable. Around 10:30, I started checking the apartment more carefully. Not dramatically. Methodically. Once I knew what to look for, the signs became impossible to ignore. A tiny scratch near the vent in my bedroom ceiling. Adhesive residue under the bookshelf facing my couch. And behind the television stand, hidden near the outlet strip, I found something that made my blood run cold. Another camera mount. Empty now, but recently used. I crouched there staring at it while my heartbeat pounded in my ears because suddenly everything clicked into place. Ryan had already been inside my apartment, probably multiple times. The cameras in the packages weren't upgrades for technology. They were upgrades for access. Better angles, better coverage, better control. A loud knock suddenly hit my front door, and I physically jumped. 3 sharp knocks. My pulse exploded instantly. He wasn't supposed to be here yet. Another knock came. Slower this time. Controlled. I walked toward the peephole carefully and looked through. Ryan stood in the hallway wearing a black hoodie and jeans, one hand resting casually in his pocket. No suitcase. No travel bag. No sign he'd just come from the airport. He looked directly at my door while waiting. Calm. Patient. Like he already knew I was standing there watching him. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. A new message from Ryan. I know you're awake. For a second, I genuinely considered pretending I wasn't home. I stood there frozen behind the door with my phone in my hand, staring through the peephole while my heartbeat hammered against my ribs hard enough to make me feel lightheaded. Ryan didn't move. He just stood there calmly in the hallway like this was a completely normal visit between neighbors. Then my phone buzzed again. Claire. Just my name. Nothing else. A cold wave moved through my stomach because suddenly I realized something terrifying. He didn't sound nervous anymore. He sounded confident. Like whatever uncertainty he felt earlier was gone now. I stepped back from the peephole slowly, trying to think clearly, but my thoughts were spiraling too fast. Every instinct in my body told me not to open the door. At the same time, another part of me understood something equally dangerous. If Ryan already knew I had discovered the cameras, refusing to answer might escalate things faster. Another knock hit the door. Still controlled. Still patient. Not angry. That somehow made it worse. Then his voice came through softly from the hallway. Claire, I think we should talk. The calmness in his tone made my skin crawl immediately because it sounded practiced. Like this wasn't the first time he'd stood outside someone's door trying to regain control of a situation. I looked around my apartment quickly. My phone, my keys. The smoke detector still mounted back in place. The unopened camera boxes near the kitchen. Every object suddenly felt important. Another text came through. You're scaring yourself. I almost laughed when I read it because the manipulation was so obvious now. 12 hours earlier, that sentence probably would have worked on me. I would have questioned myself again. I would have worried about sounding dramatic. Not anymore. I finally unlocked my phone and typed a message to Nicole instead. He's here. The reply came less than 10 seconds later. Do not let him inside. A loud silence settled over the apartment after that. Ryan stopped knocking completely, and somehow that felt more unsettling than the noise. I moved toward the living room window carefully and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look down into the parking lot below. No rental car. No airport rideshare. Nothing. Which meant one thing. He never went to Denver. The entire trip had been fake. A sharp knock suddenly hit the door again, this time harder than before. Claire. Still calm. Still controlled. But thinner now. Less patient. I walked back toward the peephole slowly and looked through again. Ryan was closer this time. Close enough that I could clearly see his expression. And for the first time since meeting him, the mask was slipping. Not rage. Not panic. Frustration. Like he was trying very hard to stay composed while something underneath kept pushing upward. My phone buzzed again. You opened the packages. Not a question. I stared at the message while my pulse pounded in my throat. Then another one came through. You should have just left them alone. That one scared me more. Because suddenly his entire personality shifted in my head. All those calm conversations. All the polite smiles. The careful friendliness. None of it had been about kindness. It had been strategy. Another knock hit the door. Much harder this time. Claire, open the door. I stepped backward automatically. And then something happened that made every hair on my arm stand up. The doorknob moved. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone testing whether it was locked. I stopped breathing. Ryan didn't knock after that. Didn't speak either. For several long seconds, the hallway outside my apartment went completely silent. Then my phone lit up one more time. You changed the lock? My blood went cold instantly. Because I hadn't told anyone that. 3 weeks earlier, maintenance replaced my original lock after the deadbolt jammed one night. I remembered Ryan standing in the hallway while they worked on it. At the time, I thought he was just making conversation with the maintenance guy. Now I realized he'd been paying attention, which meant he probably expected to already have access to my apartment. A sick feeling twisted through my chest as the full reality finally settled in. This wasn't spontaneous. Ryan had been planning me for weeks. Maybe longer. I grabbed my keys and backed away from the door quietly, trying not to make noise, but my hands were shaking badly enough that I dropped them onto the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the apartment. Silence outside. Then Ryan spoke again. Very softly. I know you're in there. My breathing turned shallow immediately. I picked up my keys again and moved toward the kitchen as quietly as possible. That's when I noticed something else through the small window above the sink. Ryan's apartment door was open, and from where I stood, I could see part of his living room. Computer monitors. Multiple screens. All facing inward toward his apartment. Toward viewing chairs. A cold rush of adrenaline hit me so hard it almost made me nauseous, because suddenly Nicole's story became completely real in my head. This wasn't obsession in the abstract anymore. It was a system. A routine. A private operation he'd built carefully over time. Then my phone rang. Ryan again. I declined the call instantly. 1 second later, another text appeared. If you call the police, they'll ask why you opened packages that weren't yours. I froze. Because there it was. The real Ryan. Calm manipulation. Careful pressure. Control through shame. Not threatening me directly. Just reminding me that he'd already thought several moves ahead. And the worst part? For one horrible second, it actually worked. Because suddenly I imagined trying to explain this entire situation out loud to strangers. The packages. The cameras. The smoke detector. The hidden surveillance. I could already hear how insane it sounded. Ryan knew that too. That's why men like him survive so long. They don't rely on people believing them. They rely on women doubting themselves first. Then another message appeared. Final one. Claire, I'm trying to help you avoid making this worse. I stared at Ryan's last message while my heartbeat pounded so hard it hurt. Claire, I'm trying to help you avoid making this worse. The manipulation in that sentence was almost impressive. Even now, after everything, he still wanted control of the narrative. He still wanted me questioning whether I was overreacting instead of recognizing what he actually was. A man who secretly installed cameras inside women's apartments. A man standing outside my door right now. Watching. Waiting. Adjusting. My hands stopped shaking after that. Not completely, but enough. Because something inside me finally shifted from fear into clarity. Ryan thought confusion was still protecting him. He thought I was too embarrassed to involve anyone else. Too uncertain. Too intimidated. Too afraid of sounding crazy. And maybe another version of me would have been. But not anymore. I opened my messages with Nicole again and typed quickly. I'm calling the police. Her reply came immediately. Good. And Claire? Do not warn him first. I locked my phone and dialed 911 before I could second-guess myself. The dispatcher answered almost instantly, and for the first few seconds, I could hear how uneven my own breathing sounded. 911, what's your emergency? I closed my eyes briefly. Then I told the truth. Not every detail. Not the whole story. Just the important part. My neighbor installed hidden cameras inside my apartment, and he's outside my door right now. Silence. Then the dispatcher's voice became calmer, more focused. Are you currently safe inside the apartment? I think so. Is the door locked? Yes. Do not open it for any reason. Officers are on the way. Outside, the hallway remained completely silent. That somehow scared me more than shouting would have. I moved quietly into my bedroom while staying on the phone with dispatch, then locked that door too. From there, I could still partially see the front entrance through the hallway. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No knocking. Just silence. The dispatcher kept asking questions while I answered as steadily as I could. How long had this been happening? Were there weapons? Did he threaten me directly? No, I said carefully. He's controlled. That was the word that kept coming back to me. Controlled. Ryan didn't lose his temper because anger wasn't useful to him. Everything he did depended on staying calm longer than the person across from him. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Another text from him. I know what you're doing. Then, you're misunderstanding this. I almost laughed reading that because suddenly every message sounded transparent. The concern. The patience. The soft tone. It was never kindness. It was management. He managed emotions the same way other people manage schedules. Outside my apartment, I finally heard movement again. Slow footsteps, then silence. I carefully walked toward the peephole and looked through. The hallway was empty. Ryan was gone. A rush of panic hit me instantly. I checked the kitchen window again. His apartment door was closed now too. For one terrifying second, I wondered if he somehow entered the building's stairwell to avoid police entirely. Then the dispatcher spoke again. Officers just arrived. Almost immediately, loud knocking echoed downstairs in the building lobby, followed by voices moving quickly through the hallway outside. Police department. I unlocked my apartment door only after they identified themselves twice. The second the door opened, all the adrenaline I'd been holding together suddenly crashed into me at once. My knees actually weakened from relief. Two officers stepped inside carefully while another remained in the hallway. One of them asked me to explain everything from the beginning. And this time, saying it out loud didn't feel crazy anymore, because now I could point to things. The smoke detector, the camera boxes, the messages, the hidden mount behind my television. Evidence. Real evidence. One officer opened the nearest package carefully while the other photographed the detector in my hallway. The moment the camera inside the box became visible, both their expressions changed immediately. Professional. Alert. Real. Not doubtful. Not dismissive. One of the officers looked at me. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "how long has this individual had access to your apartment?" Access. That word hit me hard, because suddenly I understood the real horror of all this wasn't the cameras themselves. It was the time. The weeks I smiled politely at him in the hallway. The nights I slept 10 feet away from hidden surveillance equipment without knowing. The fact that someone had quietly turned my private life into something observable. A few minutes later, more officers arrived. Then building management. Then eventually someone knocked on Ryan's apartment door across the hall. No answer. Again. Nothing. One officer looked back toward me. "Do you know if he left recently?" I nodded slowly. "He disappeared right before you arrived." The officer's expression tightened slightly. Then another officer emerged from Ryan's apartment a few minutes later after management unlocked it. And the second I saw his face, I knew. They found something. He walked toward the others quietly and spoke low enough that I couldn't hear every word. Only fragments. Multiple hard drives. Different apartments. Organized by dates. Women. My stomach turned instantly. Nicole was right. Not about some of it. All of it. Ryan hadn't just been watching me. He'd been collecting people. That night, I didn't stay in the apartment. Honestly, I never really lived there again after that. Even after the investigation started. Even after the cameras were removed. Even after Ryan disappeared completely. Because some things don't leave with the person who caused them. A few weeks later, I moved into another building across the city. Smaller place. Different neighborhood. Different locks. For a while, I checked every smoke detector anywhere I went. Hotels. Airbnbs. Friends' apartments. I know how paranoid that sounds. But once someone steals privacy from you like that, you never fully stop looking over your shoulder afterward. About 3 months later, Nicole and I finally met in person for coffee. She looked exhausted in the exact same way I felt. Not scared anymore. Just permanently aware. At one point, she asked me whether I thought Ryan would ever be caught. I remember staring down at my coffee for a few seconds before answering honestly. I think men like him survive because they learn how to look harmless. Nicole nodded slowly after that. Neither of us said much for a while. Then right before we left, she asked me one last question. "Do you know what bothers me most about all this?" "What?" She looked down at the table for a second. That there were probably moments he knew me better than the people who actually loved me. I didn't answer immediately because the truth was, I understood exactly what she meant. And even now, sometimes late at night, I still think about the version of my life Ryan watched from behind those cameras. The ordinary moments. The private routines. The parts of myself I never chose to share. That's the thing nobody tells you about being watched. The hardest part isn't fear. It's realizing your safest moments were never truly yours at all. 3 months after I moved into the new apartment, I finally started sleeping normally again. Not perfectly, but better. The nightmares stopped first. Then the constant checking. Then the habit of covering my laptop camera with tape every night before bed. Little by little, life started feeling ordinary again, which honestly scared me more than I expected. Part of me thought the fear should stay forever after something like that. Like if I relaxed too much, I was somehow being careless. But eventually routines return. That's what people don't tell you about trauma. Your brain gets tired of surviving all the time. The new apartment was smaller than the old one, but I liked that. Smaller felt easier to control, easier to understand. I installed my own locks, bought my own security system, and probably annoyed the maintenance staff by checking every smoke detector myself before signing the lease. No hidden cameras. No strange wiring. Nothing suspicious. For the first time in months, I finally started believing the worst part of my life was over. Then one Thursday night in February, I came home from dinner with coworkers and noticed something strange on my phone. A new Wi-Fi network. Node_3. I stopped walking immediately. People passed behind me in the apartment hallway while I stared at the screen, suddenly unable to breathe properly. Because I recognized it instantly. RC Node. That was the same network name I'd seen months earlier in my old apartment after finding Ryan's cameras. At first, I tried convincing myself it was coincidence. RC could mean anything. Node could mean anything. My brain was probably connecting unrelated things because it wanted patterns. Still, my hands were shaking by the time I unlocked my apartment door. I stepped inside slowly and checked the security panel near the entrance. Everything normal. Doors locked. No alerts. No movement detected. I stood there in silence for a few seconds before opening my Wi-Fi settings again. The network was gone. Just disappeared. I actually laughed nervously after that. Of course it disappeared. You scared yourself again. I forced myself to calm down, changed into sweatpants, poured a glass of wine, and spent the next hour trying not to think about it. By midnight, I'd almost convinced myself the entire thing was meaningless. Then my laptop chimed. New email. No sender name. No subject line. Just a blank message with one attached image. My stomach tightened immediately. I should have deleted it. Instead, I opened the attachment. And the second the photo loaded, every bit of warmth left my body. It was me, inside my new apartment, standing in my kitchen 2 nights earlier wearing an oversized gray t-shirt while reaching into the fridge. The angle came from above, near the smoke detector. For a few seconds, I genuinely couldn't move. I just stared at the screen while my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Then panic hit all at once. I dropped the laptop so fast it slammed shut against the couch cushion, and suddenly I couldn't breathe correctly anymore. My chest tightened hard enough that I thought I might actually pass out. No. No. That wasn't possible. I checked the apartment myself. I checked everything. My hands were shaking violently as I grabbed the hallway chair and dragged it beneath the smoke detector near my kitchen. I climbed up too fast, nearly slipping, then twisted the detector loose with trembling fingers. Normal wiring. Normal battery. Nothing hidden. I checked the second detector. Nothing. Third. Nothing. By then I was breathing so hard my vision started blurring at the edges. The photo was real. I knew it was real. The lighting. The shirt. The exact wine bottle sitting on the counter. There was no way someone could fake that. I climbed down from the chair slowly and stood in the middle of my apartment trying to think while fear spread through me in waves. Then another thought hit me. The image wasn't recent. 2 nights old. Which meant whoever took it already had access before tonight. A cold numbness settled into my chest after that. Not panic anymore. Something worse. Violation. Because suddenly I realized I was doing it again. Searching ceilings. Checking corners. Questioning my own reality. Exactly like before. My laptop chimed a second time. I stared at it from across the room without moving, then slowly walked over and opened it. Another email. Still blank. This time there was no attachment. Just one sentence. You missed the one in the living room. I felt the blood drain from my face instantly. And before I could stop myself, My eyes moved slowly toward the bookshelf across from my couch, toward the small digital clock sitting between two framed photos. The clock I bought myself 3 weeks earlier. The clock Ryan never could have touched. At least, that's what I thought.